have spent sessions where they've just solely been in the swing. We've been doing those regulatory activities because in order for a kid to want to communicate or be able to communicate, they do need to be regulated. And so, they'll communicate when they're dysregulated, but we see a lot more communication happening when they are regulated.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Therapy Unmasked here at Ability Innovations. Today, I am joined by Nick, like always.
Hi, everybody.
And just so everyone knows, it's Nick's birthday today.
Yay.
So give him a big shout out. And I also brought in Megan Bonham. Is it Bonham or Banham?
Banham.
Banham. Because I've heard it pronounced both ways, and I don't know which way is the right
Banham
way.
From now on.
Yeah.
Banham.
So Megan Banham here today, and she's an SLP, and she primarily works at our Ogden location. So the reason I brought them both here today is because today we're talking about co-treats. And for those who don't know what a co-treat is, it's essentially when we have one session with one kid, but two therapists from different practices. So for example, occupational therapy with Nick and speech therapy with Megan. And I just kind of want to dive in because I don't feel like a lot of people know why they would choose to do a co-treat versus having two separate therapies. What are the benefits? What are the pros? What are the cons? And all that. So I guess we'll start with you, Megan. If you had a parent come to you and ask you, like, should I do a co-treat? What would you say? What would be the first thing that would come to mind?
I think that overall, I'm going to look at like that kid's needs and their goals and kind of see like, what are we working on? In addition to like, maybe what goals do they have in occupational therapy? And do those goals line up at all? Or also like, how can we work together and like help each other out? I think that my initial response to the parent would be like, if I know that parent super well and I've been working with that kid for a while, and I felt like that kid was a good fit for for a co-treat, I would say, yeah, let's do it. Like, let's make it happen. But if I didn't know that kid very well and they were coming to me for the first time, I'd say, maybe let's do separate sessions for a minute and see how it goes. Or maybe we would just right off the bat try a co-treat session and see, how it worked out. I don't think it can go wrong either way. I think you can always try it out. And then if it's not working, you can separate them. So
yeah, I would say like we at Ability Innovations, we try really hard to be interdisciplinary. And what that means is that there should be like, as we work as a team, there should be like overflow back and forth between what we do. Because really at the end of the day, it's about the progress and the success and the performance of that child that we work with. And so the more that we can get like several eyes and several different pathways leading towards that end goal, I think it's better for the kid. And not every insurance company even will allow for co-treats, but when they do, what we find when it's appropriate for the kid, what we find is that kid has greater success and better outcomes because when they're working just with one therapist, they just improve kind of in that area. When they're working with two therapists, they improve in both areas, and it could be even more. Like the benefits are just augmented so much more.
Do you guys both have experience with working with all therapies as co-treats? Because we do have physical therapy here as well. What are some of the key differences that you would say between, so say, let's take you guys, for example, you have speech and occupational therapy. What would like a co-treating session look like?
Like I've worked with a physical therapist with a kid, and the kid was highly involved with musculoskeletal issues. And like we were just helping this kiddo to even be able to roll over or to get up on all fours or to do any of those kind of developmental things like crawling. And you almost needed two hands for this kiddo. You needed like one person to hold their hands or their feet, and then the other person to start working with them. And so it really made a benefit to have two therapists in the room at the same time. So me working with a physical therapist, like it was almost necessary to do that. The line is blurry between physical therapy and occupational therapy when you were talking about developmental milestones, because we both work on those and we both do very, very similar things. But the idea behind, like the focus behind the two disciplines might be two different directions, but they still have the same outcome. Like we want those kids to be able to reach those milestones.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you say that, because I was scrolling on social media the other day and I saw this meme from this physical therapy clinic, and it was, have you seen the meme of the Spider-Mans pointing at each other? Like they're both dressed as the same, and one was labeled OT and one was labeled PT, because they're just so similar sometimes.
Yeah, they really can be. And yeah, like I said, our focus might be a little bit different, but we both want the same things for our clients.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And for you, it's probably a lot different, right? Speech versus OT and PT.
Yes, definitely. There's a little bit of overlap with OT, because I know that some occupational therapists work on skills like social skills, and as SLPs, we work on like social skills and we call it pragmatic language. But overall, there's quite a big difference, especially there is no overlap between physical therapy and speech therapy. But I've overall like seen a benefit from like co-treating. Like I co-treated with a physical therapist, and it was also kind of out of necessity. This particular kiddo like had no like trunk support or stability. And so if they were taken out of their wheelchair, they were just like laying flat on their back. And a lot of times they didn't come to speech and physical therapy in their wheelchair. The parent would just carry them into the session. And so if I was trying to do speech therapy with them, I was usually sitting behind them with them in my lap, but like there's no interaction there because I was behind them. So they couldn't see me. I couldn't see them. I was, trying to sing songs and do stuff with them, but there wasn't much growth and benefit. When we started co-treating with physical therapy and speech therapy, I actually ended up getting this kiddo an AAC device, and the physical therapist would actually sit behind them and work on that trunk support and stability. And then I was in front of them, engaging with them, working on speech skills, and also working with them on their AAC device. And like that was so helpful. It helped me. It helped the physical therapist, because the physical therapist was able to like keep this kid distracted and busy while they were doing their thing. So it just overall worked really well. And then I've also had lots of really good co-treats with OTs and working on different skills. So I think like Nick said, just we're thinking about the overall like well-being and progress of these kids. And so we're thinking about like the best way to make that happen.
And I think another thing should be said about parents too. Like when parents are, they've got a kid that has lots of medical needs, or they've got a kid that's got lots of just even therapy. Oftentimes they are bouncing back and forth between therapy sessions or doctor's visits and all these things. That's one of the reasons why at Ability Innovations, we wanted to have all of the disciplines that we could, because parents are already jumping all over. So if they could do back to back, it's great, but it's even better if they do a co-treatment session, because then they get two therapies in one shot. And it's way more effective for their schedule too, because it shortens the time that they have to be sitting in a clinic. And so it's efficient for time for families, but also if we see better outcomes, then it lessens the duration of therapy. I mean, if we can get so much more done and it's so much more effective in a session, then the kid progresses, and our ultimate goal is that they don't need therapy anymore. If you can get that through co-treatment, then why not do it? The only thing that usually stops us from doing that, like I said, is insurance companies. They may not always approve a co-treatment session, or it may not be totally effective for the kid. Or sometimes, like, I've probably been guilty of this, like one therapist kind of overtakes a session, and so you might need to change the therapist around. But at the same time, most of the time, the co-treatments are very beneficial for the family and the kid.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I don't know, like insurance wise and cost wise, but would you say it's like more cost effective to do a co-treat, or is it probably about the same?
I think so. I mean, from the insurance company side, I mean, they're paying for the physical therapy and the speech therapy, or the physical therapy codes, And the occupational therapy codes, maybe you have to split those, but they're still paying for it. But if it's way more effective for the family, then we do that. Mm-hmm. And I think for parents, like if they were paying out of pocket, for example, they would see the benefit there too, because they're paying for one session. Right. And we can have our therapists doing that. Another way that we've done it that's maybe a little less effective, but still have that same benefit of co-treating is when there's a little bit of an overlap. So I've done sessions where there's like 15 minutes or 30 minutes with a speech therapist in my session with the kid, and then I take the rest of the session. And so we still get that benefit of co-treating for maybe a shorter time, but at the same time,
there's like a dedicated time slot for each one.
Yeah. And we get to focus on the things that we need to focus on. And if there's things that we need to really focus on together, we're able to do that. And if there's things that we need to focus on separately, then we have that opportunity as well. So that can be very beneficial too.
So let's get into, I guess I would say the cons, not really the cons, but I'm assuming co-treats are not for everyone, right? So how would you determine if like a kid just would not be a good candidate for a co-treat? Like they would only be good with separate therapies.
So when I think about it, there's, like we said, there's definitely kids that it doesn't work well for. Like we've even tried it and then we're like, yeah, this isn't as effective. Or there's therapists. Like I said myself, I've been in this situation where I kind of overtake the sessions and the speech therapist was like, well, I didn't really get to anything that I needed to do. And I'm like, oh, sorry. So sometimes the kid has these high needs or something, and those needs become paramount in the session. And then the session falls apart for some of the therapy plan that we might have. Maybe the kid just doesn't jive well with one of the therapists. And so they just kind of gravitate towards the other therapists. And then it makes it a little bit more tricky. And there might be, some discord there. There's other times where like a certain activity that we choose to do just focuses more on one area than the other. So for instance, I have a couple kids that are just really high energy and we'll work on like speech together with a speech therapist. And sometimes I feel bad because the speech therapist is like on the scooters with us and we're going back and forth on the scooter and racing outside or inside the building. And I can tell that speech therapist is just like, and this is normal for occupational therapy, but the speech people may not always be accustomed to that. And so when you're already like breathing hard and then you're trying to do speech, it doesn't always work out so well. So that can be a thing too. Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I was just thinking like back to what I was saying kind of in the beginning, looking at like what their goals are. Language, when we're working on like expressive or receptive language skills, that is often very easy to do in a co-treatment session. But sometimes when we're working on like articulation, or they only have goals for speech sounds, and it's like we need to get all of these repetitions or trials of this sound in, and they're doing that, they're with their OT and they're going crazy on the scooters. It can be really hard to get those like repetitions or trials in. So I think, yeah, exactly what Nick was saying, like sometimes if they gravitate towards a certain therapist, or maybe, they're doing really great on certain activities and they're avoiding the speech therapist completely, like that's a good indication that maybe we should do therapy separate so we can be like one-on-one with the speech therapist or one-on-one with occupational therapy. They can burn out all of their energy with occupational therapy and then maybe be a little bit more relaxed for speech therapy. I think it comes down to also looking at like what goals do they have, and are these goals like something that if they're running around the building, can I still target these things, or that kind of a thing.
Like you said with like articulation, like that can be hard to get all those repetitions in there. And sometimes like sessions are going so quickly, especially for occupational therapy, like, sessions are going so quickly, you can't always stop and say, oh, try that word again. Because I've heard, speech therapists say things like that. But it reminds me of like, I had a kiddo that we would work on like an AAC device or the communication device. And the kid was on a swing. And so we would be going on the swing and then all of a sudden we would just stop and I would hold the swing and everything just kind of paused. and we wanted the kid to initiate some form of communication, like ready, set, go. And they had to like hit the device, or they had to do something to show communicative intent, right? And so you can get that in there, but it doesn't always work out like that, because like the kid that we just saw like the other week, like all of a sudden he'll just hop out of the swing and walk off. And we're like, oh, now we're going this way.
Now we're onto something new.
So yeah, it doesn't always work out the way that you want it to, but that's the beauty of working with kids. Like it's always quite an adventure.
I guess what I'm gathering is it's just case by case, right? You just go off of the kids' needs and, like you said, the kids' goals. I wanted to kind of pivot a little bit and talk about regulation and dysregulation and how that relates to co-treating, because it shortens the session a little bit. And so it's a little bit harder to get to both therapies in the session. So for example, a lot of feeding therapists here at the clinic, what I notice is they'll go to the swings and they'll swing around for like 10, 15 minutes, and then they'll go to the kitchen. So with it being a co-treat, you have like that regulation or dysregulation period, and then you go to your therapies. Is that difficult to do both therapy sessions and incorporate like some kind of regulation cycle?
Sometimes, but I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Megan, but I usually see kids talk a lot more when they're on a swing. So sometimes when you're in that regulation kind of activity, like you're helping them get regulated, that's when you start to see like a lot of talking, right?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely, like in the past, have spent sessions where they've just solely been in the swing. And we've been doing those regulatory activities, because in order for a kid to want to communicate or be able to communicate, they do need to be regulated. And so, I mean, they'll communicate when they're dysregulated, but we see a lot more communication happening when they are regulated. So,
and you think about like when a kid feels good and when they're having fun, they're more apt to talk. And that's just natural like interaction between people. Like when I'm not feeling good, I don't talk as much, and I don't want to work on things that are hard for me. I want to just like curl up in a ball or something, right? Mm-hmm. And kids are the same way. And I also think like when we're trying to help a kid get regulated and they feel a lot more comfortable, they're going to talk more. But also like when I've worked in other clinics, there's speech language pathologists that, you know, a lot of what they do is in a closed environment, like in a room, and they don't get to that point where they're like, oh, I'm going to help this kid get regulated. They don't really talk about that in school a whole lot with you guys.
No.
Yeah.
I don't think I, like once throughout school, did anybody talk to me about how to regulate a kid or what regulation even meant.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. Like, if you could define that, like, I guess in layman's terms for people like me who didn't go to school, like, what is the difference between regulation and dysregulation, and what do they both mean?
For us, like we talk about in school, like it being this just right challenge, right? And that you want to get the kid to this perfect area where they're feeling content, they're feeling like they can focus. And you think about like what we do as adults. So it's probably mostly adults that are listening to this podcast. What we do as adults, when we wake up in the morning and we're kind of groggy and we pull ourselves out of bed, what kinds of things do we have to do? Like we have to get moving. And sometimes that means yoga, heaven forbid. And then sometimes it means caffeine. Sometimes it means like I have to take care of all of my personal needs. And then I let shower water hit me in the face, and then I feel alert and I'm ready to go for the day. There's things that we have to do that kind of get our brain going. I'm functioning at the optimal level, and that's what we try and do for kids. And some of that happens through sensory means. Some of that just looks at, like we're looking at what is the kid showing us? What do they need? And if we can get them, if we can give them all the things that they need to get to that just right level, then everything performs so much better.
I was just going to say, like, as an adult, like think of times that maybe you've gone into an environment where things were like, there was just a lot of stuff going on. I think for myself, like as a parent, you know, I have 3 kids. And so if 2 of my kids are crying and maybe another kid is making a mess over here and maybe I'm trying to cook dinner, so there's just like a lot going on, you can feel like very flustered and upset. And you're just kind of like, oh, what do I do? And sometimes that's kind of how these kids are feeling. They're just like, yeah, they're like really high up here, but really we need them, like Nick said, to be at this like nice level. And so, you know, as adults or parents, you know, what do we do in those situations when we're feeling like super overstimulated or dysregulated? Like, how do we bring ourselves down? Okay, so now we have to do the same thing for kids. When they're feeling at this super high level of dysregulation or overstimulation, what can we do to kind of bring them back?
Or if they're under and they're just not quite alert yet, and we got to bring up their alertness.
Mm-hmm. But you don't want to go too high.
Yeah.
So
it's a fine balance.
There you go.
Definitely.
That's why we call it the just right challenge.
See, I never would have thought of that. So that's good to know.
And we do it as adults every day. We just have learned what works for us. And a lot of that is like self-initiated. And I think back like when I was in school or I was studying for a test or something like that, something that's very stressful that I've got to put a lot of attention on and I just need to focus. What kinds of things am I doing to just focus, to sit down and focus? And maybe it's chewing gum. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's like clicking my pen over and over and annoying everybody around me. But for me, just being able to click something sometimes helps me focus. Or maybe it's like bouncing my knee the whole time.
Oh yeah, the
like,
restless leg syndrome.
We do that. We do that all the time. And those are self-regulation activities that we engage in. And usually they're harmless. But for kids, they're like experiencing their emotions. They're experiencing stress. And a lot of that is like for the first time. That's why we call it like habilitation, is because a lot of these things the kids are learning for the first time. They haven't learned this stuff before. And if we can guide them through this, we can help them figure out like, oh, my body feels better when I do these things. And I can focus more when I do these things. And if they learn those kinds of things, then we get better participation, better focus, more willingness to engage with others or the world around them. So that's why we do all that.
So Megan, do you have any like unique or fun stories that you want to share, or meaningful stories that maybe occurred during co-treats?
Yeah, I have a lot, but maybe I'll just choose like a couple of them, or maybe I'll share one and Nick can share one. Maybe it can come back to me. So one in particular that I'm thinking of right now was with an occupational therapist. This particular client was working in occupational therapy, was working on things like handwriting and fine motor skills. And in speech therapy, we were actually working on speech sounds. We were working on articulation. And so this occupational therapist and I created a like scavenger hunt. And so this particular client had to go around and find all of these words that we had hidden around the clinic. And these particular words started with a sound that we were working on. But then after they found the word, they'd have to say the word so many times. But then they had to write the word to target the occupational therapist goals. And it was so fun. Like this client loved it. Because they also got to move around the clinic and get some movement activity in there. And they were searching for things, but then we were also working on like our speech goals and our occupational therapy goals and targeted both of them at the same time in a fun way. So
I've got plenty of experiences just like that, or things that we've been doing. And I've talked about ones like on the swing, but one of my favorite ways to do like a co-treat has been if we're working like with the speech therapist or something like that, where we're doing like a video game, for example. And I've even had like where there's like 3 adults and 1 child. And maybe we're not all working with the child. Maybe there's like a student in there, right? But we've got one kid maybe we're playing Mario Kart. We've got one kid that's really good at Mario Kart, and then 3 adults that are trying to keep up with Mario Kart. And we're all racing. And every so often, somebody will pause and be like, wait, what was that word again? And we all practice it. We're like, yeah, we got to get that word right so that when we say it. And then we're like, okay, everybody ready? Ready, set, go. And then we unpause and everybody starts playing again. And then at the end, maybe we're working on social skills and we're like, good job, everybody. And we're high-fiving each other. And it feels to the kid more like it's like just a gaming session with buddies. You know, it's like a video game kind of party. For the therapist, we're like, wow, I can't wait to show this new trick to one of these other kids that's really good at video games. Or, we got to do something in a way that's totally like kid oriented. And, it's fun for adults too. But we got to work on all of these things in a way that just fits for this kid. It's very authentic to them. And I've done that a number of times, and it's always been quite an enlightening experience, because there's so much that you can do that's collaborative like that. And it helps me too to understand like what it is that speech therapy is doing. And then maybe I can start engaging that kid when I see them. Maybe I'll see them solo. I can start engaging that kid in those same things that I watched the speech therapist do. And I think the same, like the speech therapist would go, oh, like we can put in some of those social skills, or we can, all I need to do is have them stand or sit on a balance board while I'm doing this. And that helps with regulation, or that helps with some of the occupational therapy goals. So there's this idea, once again, of interdisciplinary approaches.
I want to share my favorite experience of a co-treat that I saw here. And it was actually about a year ago at our Washington Terrace location. I was filming a session with you and Rachel. And the kiddo had an iPad that he uses as an AAC, and he had just learned a bad word, and he loved to hit it like over and over. And I think it was you that would be like, "Who taught you that?" And he'd point to his mom, and she'd be like, "Well, now he listens to me." This is a really funny experience, but it was such a fun session, because
he's a little bit older, so
yeah, he is
probably kind of appropriate, that he's using that funny word.
It was such a fun session because Rachel had him moving all over the place, and then Megan would point out certain things in the room, or she would do the ready set, like trying to get him to want to engage and press things. And then I remember you would try and get him to memorize everyone's name. Like, it was just, the way it flowed was super cool with both therapies. And I think you guys did.
Yeah, his session is, Rachel and I have co-treated him for quite a while, and his sessions are very unique. I love when I have grad students come in and they watch his sessions, because a lot of times we leave those sessions and my grad student will ask me, "So what did you work on? What did you do?" And I love making it a challenge for them to try to figure it out, because it really is like so natural, and we're just like finding those little like Easter eggs as we go throughout his sessions of like, oh my goodness, we just like targeted, these social skills, or we're working on answering WH questions, and so look at all these questions he answered, or things like that. But it doesn't feel like you're working on anything, because you're a lot of times just following his lead and playing, and Rachel's doing her thing with running around or riding bikes and scooters. But there really is so much that you're actually like targeting and working on. And he has his AAC device and shares his opinions with you and tells you different things. But he's so fun.
And I don't think that every session gets to that, where, I mean, you've been at it for a while, so your first few sessions probably didn't feel like that. Felt like kind of back and forth or something like that. But that just shows like the higher skill level that sometimes it takes. And not every therapist is ready for that, especially right out of school. Like you're taught in school that you sit down at a table and you have this plan and you pull out your stuff and you go one by one with all of these different activities. And that's great. That's a generalist kind of way of approaching therapy. But when it becomes more natural and you're trying to infuse in a natural and authentic way, you're trying to infuse these different goal areas into what you're doing without the kid even really noticing or really feeling like they're working hard. They're actually working really hard, and you get way better outcomes because they're totally engaged and they're in that just right level. And that's like a higher skill. It's not easy to do as a therapist. Like, you had to learn that, right? Over time.
I remember when I first started working with that particular client and telling Rachel after like a month or two, I was like, I don't feel like I'm doing anything. Like, I don't think I'm working on anything. And she's like, "You're doing great, Megan. Like, just keep it up. You're doing fine." And it really did. It took time. It took me learning and kind of opening my eyes and looking at the bigger picture before I realized like, oh, I actually am doing something. I am making a difference for this particular client. even though I maybe didn't feel like that in the beginning.
Yeah, I had a speech therapist friend that said something that was really intriguing to me. She said that she went to this conference and it just like opened up her mind because they said something like, speech doesn't start on the lips, it starts on the hips. and they said, it just made me think like kids need to move. We don't talk just sitting in a chair. Like kids need to move. And like I said, at every other clinic that I've been in, there's always been like speech therapists that they don't work on the swings. They sit in a room with a kid. And I'm not saying that that's bad or ineffective, but I'm saying like it's a lot more natural what we do with a kid, and especially co-treating. I think it's a lot more natural to work with a kid and to engage as a group, or, you know, we always say that we're part of the village. And it takes a village to raise a kid. And I think that all these things combined really are the best outcome for kids. It's really like a higher way of doing therapy.
I think that's a good place to kind of wrap things up a little bit. I did want to bring up one last point, which is how can we better support parents that have kids in these situations, that even if it's a co-treat or if it's just a normal session, what are like some good tips and advice you give to parents as they bring kids in for sessions?
Well, for example, if it is a co-treat session and occupational therapists and speech therapists are working on something, or maybe physical therapists and speech therapists are working on something, I always try to think of like, what's a fun activity, or what's a fun activity that we did here in therapy that would be easy to transfer and do at home. So for example, that scavenger hunt activity that I shared earlier, that's super easy for parents to put together and do at home. And it doesn't even have to be that a parent goes and hides words around their house. It could be simply that they, tell their kid, go find 5 things that start with S. And then that kid goes and finds 5 things that start with S somewhere in their household. And then they, write those words and practice those words. If it's a language, like they're working on expressive language, maybe we're doing a sensory activity where we're playing in like a sensory bin and we're using descriptive terms. We're saying, oh, it's soft or it's bumpy, or we say, maybe we're using verbs and saying, oh, we're smashing it, or, oh, I'm rolling it. But they're still getting that like sensory input that they need, or maybe we're trying to like help them with messy play and get used to that because it's the stepping stone for some type of feeding goal. I just sometimes think it takes therapists to think a little bit more outside the box, and how can we like transfer these skills to home, and then giving those activity recommendations to parents.
I love that, because if they work on it more at home, they're going to see results faster.
Yeah, for sure.
That makes up a huge difference. And I always say too, we see like this collaborative co-treating approach like being so successful in so many cases. And it just goes to show like when the whole family gets involved to help a kid, like maybe the kid is working on something that is really hard for them, but when they're able to do it in a fun way with the whole family, like, or maybe just both of their parents, that can be very, very rewarding and very, very successful for a kid. So it could just be like a board game that they're playing. And if both parents will find a time and play with that kid, you can see a lot better outcomes than just working one-on-one with a kid. Like if a mom is working with their son or daughter, or a dad is working with their son or daughter, it's good. If it's more, like if it's a sibling and a parent, even better. If it's 2 parents, even better. So it's just something to consider. Like I said, it takes a village, and maybe it's grandma, and an uncle that come and work on these things, and they can help a kid be part of a group that helps them in their goals.
Well, thanks for joining us today, Megan.
Thank you guys.
And happy birthday to Nick once
Yay.
again. So we'll go ahead and wrap up today. Again, this is Therapy Unmasked. Thank you for sticking around for this episode. Therapy Unmasked is brought to you by Ability Innovations. If you go to www.abilityinnovations.com, we have a lot of free and paid resources that you can take advantage of. We've got lots of blogs, podcast episodes, and videos to help you feel supported with your child's therapeutic journey at home. And if you'd like to support us further, you can go ahead and check out our Therapy Unmasked courses. where for a monthly subscription of $14.99, you can gain access to all of the courses that we have available that range from everything in occupational therapy, speech therapy, and physical therapy. And right now you can get your first month free if you use code FREETHERAPY, all caps. Again, thank you for joining us today, and we will see you in the next episode of Therapy Unmasked. Bye.
Bye.